Right now I'm delighted to be joined by a landlord who has been in the business for 43 years.
God, that makes me sound old.
That is some achievement, Tony. I'm joined by Tony Altman, who's a landlord in Sheffield. So, Tony, 43 years in the business, my goodness, you must have seen some changes.
Oh, massively. I mean, when I first came in the business, you know, if you had central heating, you were massively ahead of your time. You know, we were one of the first to put central heating in. So I was in those sort of days.
And tell me a little bit about how you've grown your portfolio. What sort of properties do you have?
Well, at the moment we've got almost exclusively professionals and students. Many years ago we used to do a DSS, and we'd be quite happy to do that now if it wasn't so unprofitable. The point is that various changes that the government has really made letting to DSS tenants just completely unprofitable. It's very hard to do, and they've discouraged massive amount of landlords from it, which is a shame, which means this sector of the population who desperately need this sort of accommodation suddenly find themselves untenable simply because of the actions of various government regulations.
Well, we'll talk more about regulations in a moment, but what qualities or you know, how do you think you've managed to stay in the business for 43 years? What has been the secret of your success to survive for so long?
Dogmatic persistence and attention to detail, and a fanatical obsession with trying to keep myself clear of doing anything that could remotely be called illegal, because it is so easy now to be criminalised by the massive amount of draconian legislation which we are constantly under boot of.
So really what you're saying is that landlords have to be educated, they have to keep up with regulation, and they, you know, have to make sure that they've dotted the I's and crossed the T's.
They have to be, but with the proviso, I have to say, since something like 90% of landlords are part-timers, small landlords, they cannot physically do it. They can't do a day job and they couldn't even read all the legislation, let alone comply with it. So the government has made it virtually impossible for the small family to let out property legally, and that is totally unfair and unjust.
Well, obviously we're talking today in the aftermath of the autumn statement, where we heard that there was going to be a Buytolet tax hike of 3% on any second properties or Buytolet properties, following on from the tax changes in the summer budget. So really, is it your view that the government is looking to rid the sector of small private landlords?
I think their end game appears to be the complete extermination of the small private landlord.
Wow, that's strong stuff.
It needs saying, because that is what their actions show. If it's any different, then I challenge the government to come out and say otherwise.
Now, you were in my Right to Rent seminar, which I've just hosted here at the Landlords and Lettings Show, and you were very vocal that you felt that this legislation was just becoming more and more onerous, and you know, the good guys are actually already doing much of this stuff, and the rogues aren't going to take any notice of it anyway. Precisely,
they're under the radar. They're not giving local authorities the budgets to police it. For instance, in our area, HMO licensing, for which we pay massive licence fees, at the current rate, it will be something like 96 years before all my properties have been inspected. How much safer does that make a tenant? You know, it's simply not doable, and they haven't got the budget to chase after rogues, so they just go through the motions of checking up on the honest, decent, hard-working landlords. And, you know, they need the private rented sector. Private landlords are doing a wonderful job of putting families and single people in secure, decent accommodation. The standards are going up all the time. People have every right to feel grateful for them, but the government is showing no gratitude for the job, no recognition whatsoever of the wonderful job that the private landlord is doing, is housing families in this country.
Absolutely. And you've been a landlord for 43 years, which suggests to me that you've enjoyed your time being a landlord, but is your view changing now? Are you thinking of it's time to hang up your landlord hat?
I'm thinking, and I've already started, investing in other countries, because I feel that ultimately, unless there's a sea change in their viewpoint, that the government wants to force the private landlord out of the UK. They only want institutional investors. And like I said, landlords are doing a wonderful job in this country. There's a few rogues. They get all the publicity. There's never any praise given to the people who are doing such a wonderful professional job. And it is about time we were given some encouragement. It's all right having the carrot and stick, but all we get is a stick.
Absolutely, I agree. I can see what you're saying. So just to finish then, what are your views on the private rented sector going forward? Do you think that landlords that adapt and change, it's worth them staying in the sector?
I think it could be for the larger wealth finance landlords. Those with large mortgages in terms of their ratio of mortgage to property value could find themselves, yes, highly leveraged, could find themselves in a position of negative cash flow and be in serious financial difficulty. Small landlords could quite literally find themselves bankrupted by this legislation. And the government we simply do not have enough homes being built every year. We need another 130,000 homes that are being built in this country every year. That's not likely to happen soon because of our broken planning system and various other constraints. They need the private landlord to fill that chasm, and all they're doing is discouraging it. Sorry, their whole legislation moving forward is totally out of step with what they're trying to achieve, and they really need to get their act together on this.
Now, I'm not sure if you voted Conservative, Tony, but do you think that the Conservatives who have in the past supported landlords and entrepreneurial spirit, do you think they've actually stabbed us in the back?
Absolutely. For short-term political gain, they've not only just stabbed us in the back, but they've seriously damaged the private rented sector in this country, and they are going to reap the whirlwind of that for years to come.
Wow, interesting stuff to finish on. There's a landlord of 43 years sharing his views about the future of the private rented sector. Thank you so much for joining me, Tony. It's been lovely to meet you and to speak with you.
Okay, cheers.